Sorry. I think early in that. Okay, so we're broadcasting.
No, I just look at my phone.
Well, the people in the room know who I am. For the people who are watching online, my name is Arthur Asadurian, one of the pastors at COAC. And just going to jump into what we're going to be talking about today. Let me say a word of prayer, guys, and then we'll introduce the topic, okay? Father, we thank you, God, for...
So we're broadcasting. No,
I guess,
sorry.
Okay, people in the room know who I am. For the
At least now I know it's working, right?
my name is Arthur Asadurian, one of the pastors at COAC.
Okay, cool.
And
All right, we're good.
Hey, we're good. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's pray. Father, we thank you, God, for raising up people in your church who are committed to fight for the lives of the people. And Lord, thank you for my brothers and sisters who diligently go out there and try to communicate with people. And by your grace and by your will, get them to choose life. And I mean that in two ways, Lord. I don't just mean that in regards to physical life, but I pray that they would choose life in the eternal kind of sense, that they would choose to follow Jesus Christ. Be with us as we go through this topic today. Guide us and lead us, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so our task today is to go through three different issues, topics, however you want to put it, that I've been assigned. Number one, conduct, how we ought to conduct ourselves in public when we're speaking with people. Number two, logical fallacies, logic and logical fallacies. And then number three, tactics, how to have conversations with people, how to properly communicate with people. Okay? Let me just start off in regards to conduct. This is kind of the go-to verse when it comes to apologetics. Obviously, many people know it. This is out of 1 Peter 3:15. It says, "But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you." And I think a lot of people stop there and they go, "We got to have a response. We got to have a reason for the hope we have." But the text continues to saying, "Yet do this with gentleness and respect." How do we conduct ourselves? This is something that's very tricky. I was having a conversation with Solomon. I said, "How do you teach this? How do you teach people how to conduct themselves?" It's probably better, as they say, it's probably better caught than taught. So hang out with some people is one of the suggestions I would say, who are veterans on the streets, who've been doing street ministry for a while, and who conduct themselves accordingly. They honor Christ in their conduct on the streets. So when they're having a conversation with someone, they're respectful. They actually listen. They're humble. This again says respect people. You just can't get past that. Be gentle with people. Now, to say being gentle doesn't mean you're not bold. You can be both. I think Jesus. Just read the Gospels. Jesus is both gentle and bold, right? If he needs to be sharp with people, he's sharp with them, but he's gentle with them. Even in the harshness of some of the things he's saying, he's always willing to entertain people. Like, he hangs out at Pharisees' homes. Nicodemus comes to see him at night. These would be like, quote unquote, his enemies, the Pharisees, right? But Jesus is open to that. And one of the ways I think we need to prepare our hearts is by a lot of prayer. And I can't stress this enough. When we're out on the streets, when we're talking to people, we ought to be praying a lot. And I think our prayer should be on the subject of, God, help me be humble. Help me view people with the kind of love that you view people. Let me have your heart. That was my prayer when I would go on the streets, is I'd say, Lord, give me your heart for people. You can't go wrong with that. And I saw my heart changing towards people. Here's one thing I want to mention is when we get into these things, tactics, logical fallacies and stuff, we're not doing this so we can win arguments. That's not the point of this stuff, right? We're doing this to win people. And winning arguments and winning over people are two different things. So if you're just going after an argument, you can be as harsh or however you want to be. But if you want to win the person, right, you got to be winsome. So it's not just the argument you're presenting. You're being a jerk and you're presenting a bunch of good, solid arguments. You're still being a jerk. So stop being a jerk. So I mentioned a couple of things. Be a good listener. Respect people. Show them human dignity, right? We do realize people are making really, really, really bad decisions in their lives. I mean, we can't stress. We're talking about this in the context of abortion. We can't stress the fact of someone who's going to go into a clinic and have an abortion. That's as like evil as it gets. But even in the midst of that, we ought to be gracious, loving, and give them human dignity, as we would anyone else. And I actually think only Christians can support this in regards to a worldview. So conduct-wise, that's what I would say. Again, I want to stress the fact that it's better caught than taught. Hang out with people who have certain characteristics in their lives, not just on the streets, just in totality, who portray that. Hang out with people who are humble. Become humble yourself. Seek that out. Say, I want to become a more humble person, or I want to become a better listener. Start hanging out with people. See how they conduct themselves. Ask them questions. How'd you become like this? How did you learn how to listen? I know that was very difficult for me. I keep speaking about it because it took me a number of years to learn how to listen. Without, like if I'm having a conversation with someone, argument, whatever, and they're in the middle of saying what they want to say, and I already have like 5 things I want to say, to just shut up and let them finish, instead of just like cutting them off and saying, well, there's 5 issues you have or something like that, right? But I learned that from people. I observe people. And God works like this. He changes us as a community. That's just the bottom line. So again, conduct, take the 1 Peter passage, 1 Peter 3:15, and be gentle and respectful, is what I would say. Okay? Let's talk about why tactics, and then I'll just give you kind of 3 points on why we need tactics, and then I'll jump into the fallacies, and then we'll go back to tactics. Okay, why do we need tactics when we talk to people? Shouldn't we just well, one of the reasons is because we have a purpose. When we're out, or when you're at work, wherever you may be, and you fall into the conversation with someone, you have a limited amount of time to persuade them of something, right? So you got to pick and choose, in a sense. So here's 3 things. Tactics help you control the conversation by getting you into the driver's seat and keeping you there. If you're the one that initiates the conversation, or even if you're not, you want to be in the driver's seat. You want to control the conversation. What ends up happening when it comes to some of these issues most of the time is we just go back and forth. People say their ideas, especially on controversial issues like abortion, right? You get back and forth, 30 minutes just back and forth, and nobody's really heard anything. And then you get some emotional responses or something like that, and that's it. So we use tactics, or tactics are necessary because it helps you be in control of the conversation, and you want to guide the conversation somewhere. And where you want to guide the conversation is you want the person in front of you to come to a self-realization. You want them to come to realize something they already do not know. And this takes me back to the whole thing about conduct, by the way, and about winning people. You're using these tactics to get the person to realize something, not for you to make your point. So that's one, keeps you in the driver's seat. Number two, tactics help you maneuver effectively in the face of opposition. So someone, let's say, presents 4 things about why they don't think abortion is good, right? 4 different arguments. If you're thinking about it tactically, you can navigate that, you can maneuver. You can see weak points in their arguments, and you can also see strong points in their arguments. You might realize a strong point in their argument and not have an answer for it, and say something like, hey, let me think about that. That's a good point you make. I mean, that's a part of the whole conduct then, about being humble, about being intellectually honest when it comes to these conversations. Because you have to always be open to learning in general. And then number 3, tactics help your engagement seem more like diplomacy than combat. Again, when it comes to controversial issues, people go into this already with so many presuppositions, right? I've had funny things said to me, like, you're racist Southerner or something like that. I've had statements like that said to me, and I'm like, dude, I'm Armenian. I was born in Armenia. You know, like I've never, you know, I've like flown over the South or something like that. You know, why would you say? But listen, they've built up certain stereotypes that they want to put on this. And so we use tactics because I actually want to have a conversation with someone. I don't want to just like fight them and yell at them and present all my stuff and then say, see ya. You know, I did my job. That's not right. That's not how Jesus does things, and that's not how Jesus did things when we studied the text. And we're going to look at some text, but so let's leave that on the side. So 3 things: helps you control the conversation, you maneuver effectively, and then you have actually a dialogue, diplomacy, rather than combat and fighting and stuff like that. So let's look at some fallacies. Okay, there's 3 major laws of logic that people will talk about, and then there's a bunch of fallacies. If you Google informal logical fallacies and just click on the Wikipedia page, there's going to be so many fallacies that people have come up with. It's overbearing. It's just a lot. There's no way you can even remember a lot of them. As you go through them, you realize that you commit a lot of them in basic conversations. You know, this is one thing. Side story. Let me share this with you guys. There's a story online, I think, called "The Fallacy of Love," and it's probably not true. So I don't know, maybe, but it's the story about a guy who is basically in love with his roommate's girlfriend. Okay. This is like they're already crossing boundaries. But the story goes that his roommate likes this coat that this guy has, and he basically tells his roommate to back off. He's going to give him this coat. But the girl he's in love with, he's attracted to, is dumb, but she's really pretty. So this guy sits there and says, okay, this girl's really dumb, but she's really pretty, and I want a pretty girlfriend. And so he basically reasons through saying, well, if I get with a smart girl who's ugly, I can never make her pretty. But if I get with a girl who's pretty, who's dumb, I can make her smart. And so basically that's how he goes. And he starts teaching this girl logical fallacies. That's kind of what the paper is. Towards the end of it, he tells her that he loves her, basically, you know? And every way he tries to communicate his love is fallacious. So he'll say something and the girl will be like, oh, it's appeal to authority. So he never gets the girl. He never gets the girl because she calls him out on everything. You know, every way he tries to communicate his love for this girl, it's squashed. She calls him out on it. And listen, when you start looking at these things, you realize that we commit these fallacies a lot on a daily basis, especially when we're in like heated arguments with family members or something like that. You know, parents do this, some of these a lot, right? Like a parent will tell their child, you can't go out. And it's like the child, let's say, a bit smart, and says, why, mom and dad? And then mom and dad say, because I said so. And then the kid if he's a bit more clever, says something like, "Wow, that's that's an appeal to authority moment." So you get into these kinds of things, and we do them. We shouldn't do them in our own personal lives, but we do them. Is what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to mention 3 of them. I'll read the definitions, and then mention 4 fallacies that are commonly used specifically in regards to the issue of abortion and when we have conversations with people. That's why I didn't choose all of them. Some of them is just, the stuff that I think are used on the ground. So the law of identity basically says P is P. For any proposition P, it is that proposition, or it is P. Okay, so the law of identity says that if a statement such as "it is raining" is true, then the statement is true. More generally, it says that the statement P is the same thing as itself and is different from everything else. Applied to all reality, the law of identity says that everything is itself and not something else. Everything is itself and something else. And someone might be sitting there and saying, "Duh," right? Like, that's kind of obvious and self-evident, and that's exactly the point. These things are self-evident. These things are obvious. We use them all the time. Just because we had a bunch of philosophers sit there and formulate these things properly doesn't mean they came up with it. These things are just self-evident. So that's one. The law of non-contradiction, which I think out of these 3 that I'm about to mention, this is the one that we should become like most familiar with, because it's the one that I think people just ignore, especially in our culture. So the law of non-contradiction says P is not non-P. So law of non-contradiction says that the statements such as "it is raining" cannot be both true and false at the same time in the same way. Of course, it could be raining in Missouri and not in Arizona, but the principle says that it cannot be raining and not raining at the same time in the same place. When we get to the tactics, I'm going to employ this specific one. Okay. The law of excluded middle says either P or not non-P. The law of excluded middle says that a statement such as "it is raining" is either true or false. There is no alternative. Right? Give you a case in regards to the abortion debate. Either a fetus is a human being or it is not. There's no kind of middle ground. Some philosophers have tried, by the way, of trying to develop some kind of a middle ground. Like, they'll use language like potential life. It's not life, it's not human life, but it's potential human life. And they formulate an argument based on this. So these fundamental laws are true principles governing reality and thought, and are assumed by Scripture. Some claim they are arbitrary Western constructions, but this is false. The basic laws of logic govern all reality and thought, and are known to be true for at least 2 reasons. Number 1, they are intuitively obvious and self-evident, which is the whole duh moment. And once one understands the basic law of logic, one can see that it is true. And 2, those who deny them use these principles in their denial, demonstrating that those laws are unavoidable and that it is self-refuting to deny them. You can't reason without the laws of logic. It's just impossible. So let's look at these 4 fallacies. The genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy says, it basically is a definition to it, where a conclusion is suggested based solely on something or someone's origin rather than its current meaning or context. The point of this is how a belief originates. The genetic fallacy says, just because of how the belief originated doesn't mean the belief itself is wrong. Right? So a common one that atheists like to throw out about Christians, and I've seen brilliant individuals in debates doing this, is they'll say something like, well, you think God exists and you became a Christian because you're afraid of hell. So they're going to the origin of the belief. Let's just even entertain the thought that the genesis, right, the beginning of that belief, that God exists, based on this fear of hell, was uncalled for or unfounded. That does not mean the belief that God exists is false. It's the bottom line. It really doesn't matter how you come to beliefs when it comes to this, right? Because you can accidentally come to beliefs. I'm sitting here and I go, Solomon has got 150 bucks in his pocket. And we empty his pockets and then he's got exactly 150 bucks. And it was a complete random comment. And I came to the belief, right, Solomon has $150 in his pocket. Just because I randomly guessed that, the beginning of that belief, doesn't mean the belief itself is false. So that's basically what it says. Let's think about the second one, is a straw man, an argument based on the misrepresentation of an opponent's position. This happens a lot in the abortion debate, and I must say it happens on both sides. I think there's a lot of Christians who create straw men, and then there's a lot of non-Christians or pro-abortion individuals who create these things. So it's basically, I would like group it with a hasty generalization, which is another fallacy, which basically says that you generalize something too quickly. That's the way these things come about. Based on ads, based on 5-minute CNN interview someone saw, and they think they know the whole debate about abortion and all its intricacies and stuff like that. Or they saw some guy present a certain thing and they debunked it. I've heard things like, a fetus is just a lump of cells. How can you say that's a human being? That's a straw man. Right? Like, that's not what a fetus is, number one. And number two, it's so vague, like a clump of cells, what the heck does that mean anyways? Because we're technically clumps of cells. These kinds of comments are thrown around, and they're straw man kind of arguments. So the straw man is an argument based on a misrepresentation. And then Christians should watch out for this too. We have our own share of doing this. There's people out there who have decent arguments. Now, I don't see them to be true, obviously, but at least we should give them the respect of dialogue, rather than saying, oh, it's just trash, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay. The two other ones I want to mention go hand in hand. One of them is an appeal to authority. Basically says when an assertion is deemed true because of the position or authority of the person asserting it. Abortion is legal. Why? Because the government says it's legal. This is an appeal to authority. Abortion is right. Why? Because so-and-so, who's an authority, Dr. So-and-so says it's right. And you'll hear this kind of quotations. Now, we can call people and say, hey, so-and-so says this, and deal with that. But just because so-and-so says it doesn't make it right. That's the appeal to authority part. They're saying just because so-and-so says it makes it right. Just because the government says it makes it right. And one of the problems with this is evident, like I like to immediately come up with, is governments who said things and they've been wrong. Or authorities who said things and they've been wrong. So take like slavery or the Holocaust or something like that. Any one of those things would work. And I think, again, authority and majority go hand in hand. Well, the next one is appeal to majority, where a proposition is claimed to be true or good solely because many people believe it to be so. This is clearly not the case, and you can have a majority of people believing a false thing. As a matter of fact, most atheists I come into conversation with they won't appeal to majority, but they'll say something like, just because most people believe in God doesn't mean that belief in God is right or true. And they're right. We can't appeal like we can't say, well, most of the world are theists, therefore theism should be true or something like that. That stuff doesn't fly. So appeal to majority. Most people in the United States believe abortion is okay, something like that, which I highly doubt that's true, but that's the kind of stuff people use. Okay. Let's deal with tactics. I've taken these aren't my original thoughts, so I got to give credit where credit is due. Gregory Koukl has developed this. He's written a book on it called Tactics, and he also has a DVD series where he's teaching kids, it's 6 DVD series called Tactics. I recommend that people go through this with church groups, friends, whatever. People should just go through this. So Gregory Koukl likes to develop this in the following way. He calls the Columbo tactic, and he develops this off of the type of Columbo. These are old movies, modern people are like unaware of. But basically, the Columbo tactic is developed off of asking questions, because that's what Columbo does. He'll walk into a crime scene and then he'll say, I'm not getting this, can you explain such and such? And then they'll explain it and he say, just one more question, and then one more question. And he just like asks 50 million questions. That's one more question. So basically that's the concept, is asking questions. So here are 3 things with some subpoints. The guideline to the Columbo tactic is simple. If you hit a roadblock, ask a question. 2 subpoints on that. Never make an assertion when a question can make the same point. Why? Why never make an assertion when a question can make the same point? Because when you question someone, it opens them up in their assumptions and presuppositions. When you question someone, it opens up the person you're questioning in their assumptions. Most people have come to certain beliefs without really thinking deeply about it. They just kind of hold it. This goes with everyone, Christians included. Just stop some Christians and say why they believe in God. See what happens. So Jesus does this, I think, and I want to have some interaction with some Jesus conversations with people. So we're going to look at 2 stories where Jesus, I think, employs this kind of thinking. So Solomon, why don't you read the story with the rich young ruler.
This is Matthew chapter 19, verse 16. Now behold, one came and said to him, Good teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life? So he said to him, Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. But if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. He said to him, Which ones? Jesus said, You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness. Honor your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The young man said to him, All these things I have kept from my youth. What do I still lack? Jesus said to him, You want to be perfect? Go sell what you have and give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me. But when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowfully, for he had great possessions.
So, see, Jesus didn't shy away from answering this man his question. He goes on to tell him actually a bunch of stuff. But in the beginning, he questions him. So the guy comes to him with a question. He says, Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus could have just started saying what he says halfway through the story. Keep the commandments. The guy would have said, I haven't kept the commandments. The guy says, I've kept the commandments. What do I lack? Jesus says, sell your possessions. And the guy doesn't do it and walks away. But there's this kind of point, right, where Jesus stops and says, Why do you call me good? Only God is good. Why do you call me good? Only God is good. And I think he's trying to open up this young man within his assumptions. I think he's going after, listen, if you really mean to say I'm good, like I'm the authority on this subject, what I'm about to say, you have to do. There is no escape from it. They're equal to the commandments that Jesus goes on to talk about. They're equal to them. Clearly, by the end of the story, we see that this guy doesn't take Jesus very seriously. So his kind of gesture, good teacher, what must I do, is more of a, he's being nice. He doesn't really mean it, right? It's maybe equal to people nowadays saying things like, "Oh, I believe in Jesus. I follow Jesus." Right? Do you really follow Jesus? Do you really believe in him? Or you're just being nice to the historical character of Jesus? This is the kind of person this is. The second story has to do with, and I think it's pretty obvious in this one, with paying taxes to Caesar. Why don't you read that, Solomon?
This is Matthew chapter 22, verse 16. And they sent to him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true, and teach the way of God in truth. Nor do you care about anyone, for you do not regard the person of men. Tell us, therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, "Why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money." So they brought him a denarius, and he said to them, "Whose image and inscription is this?" They said to him, "Caesar's." And he said to them, Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.
Yeah. So they're trying to trap him, that's clear. And they like half the passage is nice words about Jesus that these guys are saying, "Good teacher, we know that you don't care about what people have to say," and all this stuff. They're just kind of letting Jesus say, "Oh, we respect you, we love you, you're a great teacher." And then they try to trap him. Should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? There's three groups in front of him, right? The Pharisees, the group of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Herodians, who all come together and who all have a certain political stance. The Herodians are on the side of Herod and Caesar. So are the Sadducees. The Pharisees are not. They're anti. So the enemy of my the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah. So these guys are enemies traditionally, but they hate Jesus more. So they've unified on it. And their intention is to trap him. So Jesus says, "Pay taxes to Caesar." The Pharisees are going to get mad and say, "We want to kill Jesus." He says, "Don't pay taxes to Caesar." The Sadducees and the Herodians are going to go back and say, "This guy's rebellious to the Roman government to have Jesus killed." So whatever he says, he's trapped. It's a clever trick. It really is. Some have said, if you really want to trap someone, get them in trouble with the government. And that's what they're trying to do, right? Trying to go over tax stuff. And yet Jesus opens them up there and opens them up in their assumptions, in their theological assumptions. He says, "Give me a coin." They give him a coin and says, "Whose image is on this?" And he questions them. He could say, "This is Caesar's image." He could say that, and it'd be a true statement. But Jesus doesn't say that. He starts off with a question. Jesus does this all the time. Just read the Gospels with that kind of a lens, you see it all over the place. So he says, "Whose image is on this?" And they say, "It's Caesar's image." He says, "Great. Give to Caesar what is Caesar, and give to God what is God's." And the story ends like that. If the story were to continue, I'm assuming they would have asked something like, let me put it this way. If the story were to continue, and Jesus says, "Give to God what is God's," they would have said, "What is God's?" And Jesus would have said, who is God's image on? Right? The reason why I think they didn't ask the question is because they knew exactly what the answer would have been. These are highly religious societies, are highly intelligent people who are asking them this question. They knew exactly where Jesus was going. You go to Genesis, and God creates man in his own image and in his likeness. He created them, both male and female, he created them, the Bible says. So give to God what is God's. And Jesus is telling them, give yourself to God. Forget about the money stuff. You need to give yourself to God. But again, let's back up. Jesus questions them to open them up in their assumptions. They're talking this is Caesar's. Give this to Caesar. Give that to Caesar. And ultimately, we belong to God because we're made in his image. So these are just two examples we see in the Bible, and they're all over the place. The Good Samaritan. Jesus gives a story, and then he questions the people sitting in front of him. He says, who was this man's neighbor? And they have an answer for it. So continuously questions people. And this is what the Columbo tactic is. Someone comes to you, and you guys are having a conversation, or even the question might be the conversation starter. You ask a question. Don't assert stuff, right? Do you, instead of saying abortion is wrong, say as your starting point of conversation or something like that, ask someone, do they think abortion is wrong? Or what are their thoughts about abortion? That's just kind of to get the conversation going, right? You want to start somewhere. And listen, the bottom line is people love being heard, and people want to share their ideas. And I think it's just people feel more invited into a conversation when you ask a question rather than make an assertion. Now again, there's points to make assertions. We see Jesus doing it. But you shouldn't start with an assertion necessarily, because what happens? Either it's going to get really kind of tense and it's going to be a combat feel to it, not a dialogue feel to it. And that's not what you want. So if you hit a roadblock, ask a question. Just a side note on this, with planning and practice, this tactic becomes second nature. This has become really, really second nature to me, to the point of annoyance. I do this with like everyone, including my wife. So you have to also watch the other side. Like, she'll say something, I'm like, really? And then she'll like, dude, just stop. Like, we're like having dinner, and I made a comment about the spaghetti or something like that. And you're like, oh, spaghetti. How many different kinds of spaghettis are there, or something like that? It's just, you got to watch it. But trust me, if you do it enough, it becomes like that. Like, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and they drew a sharp distinction between intellectualism and spiritual, right? So they say, oh, we have Bible studies, and it's very like intellectual based. And she had gone to a different Bible study, and she said it was very spiritual. And so instead of saying, and I could have said what I wanted to say, something like, you shouldn't have a distinction between intelligence and spiritual, because they're one. They can be one and the same. I said, what do you mean by spiritual? What do you mean by spiritual? And she was kind of like, she really didn't know. What she meant was, she went to a Bible study where the person teaching it spoke more about how to apply the text, like daily application, rather than like the theory, the theology behind it, and various kinds of things. And there's different ways we study the Bible. But what she meant by spiritual was, someone told me how to live my life. But that's spiritual, right? Again, it was just a simple question that opened her up in her assumption. This is a friend of mine, right? It was an argument, but I wanted to teach her something. She was like, okay, I get it. Because I wasn't like threatening, right? Like, hey, stop doing that stuff. You're wrong. So you want to ask questions so you want people to come to realize things themselves. It's always better. It's always a better the learning that happens is much better than when you just teach someone. Right? I mean, think about like modern education systems. You can go sit in a lecture and some guy get up there and talks and talks and talks, and then finishes it and you go home. Or the guy can talk and then you get to practice what he talked about. You will learn it better because of that. So it's always a better way of teaching if you let the person come to the conclusion themselves, but you kind of guide them. You know where you want them to go, so you're there with them. You don't leave them alone. You want to guide them to the truth. That's just very awesome. When they realize it, it's really cool. So this approach offers tremendous advantages. Here are 4 of them, and I've mentioned some of these. Questions are interactive, inviting others to participate. So 1. Number 2, questions make headway without requiring you to state your case. So you might say something, and then someone's like, oh, you're one of those And you're like, whoa, I haven't said anything. Right? I didn't say what I believe. I've just asked you what you believe. So don't assume what you. Now they might say like, okay, cool. What is it that you believe? And tell them what you believe. You know, don't be like, oh no, it's a secret. We'll tell you later. Like, don't be. These tactics aren't to be sneaky or, you know, tricksters or something like that. They're meant to guide. They're meant to guide us, not so we can be sneaky. So they give headway, and you don't have to state a case. And listen, you might not even have a case. I remember I went out and some of the guys were doing pro-life work, and I went and got involved, but I didn't state my case. I didn't say what it was. But I kind of stood there and had a conversation with two guys who were actually thinking about the subject. And I was able to ask them about 3 to 4 questions that opened them up in their assumptions. And then towards the end, they turned to me and they said, what's your position on this? You know, and I was able to give them my position. But until then, they didn't know what my position was. I was able to ask questions that were pertaining to the statements they were making and cause them to think. And they actually think that this has been very challenging. And that was like a 15-minute conversation altogether. It wasn't 3 hours long. Just like I was able to pick the right questions to ask on the stuff that was coming out of their own mouth. So most importantly, the Columbo tactic puts you in the driver's seat. This is very important. I don't like random conversations in the sense of we're just like saying stuff back and forth. It should have an end point, and the driver should know where it's going. It's the bottom line. You're in the driver's seat. You know, most women win arguments with their spouses because they're the ones asking questions. I don't know if you've thought about it like this. So a woman will come to her husband and say something like, "Does this dress make me look fat?" She's already in the driver's seat. She's controlling the conversation, right? Now, I don't think it's like intentional. Right? I don't think like women had a meeting and they're like, "Hey, we need to be in the driver's seat when we have a conversation with our husbands." But that's just the case. What is the guy supposed to say, right? Let's say he does make her look fat, and he knows if he says that, his wife's gonna go crazy. So he lies, right? Oh no, it doesn't, honey, it doesn't. And then she'll go and look in the mirror and then say something like, "Oh, it makes me look fat." She'll take it off anyways and change it to something else. So again, women are awesome at this. They ask questions. You know, guys, we just want to like say stuff, but we need to learn how to ask questions. So in a given conversation, let's say, this for comical purposes, and I've actually done this. My wife knows I've done this. So she's asked me something like, "Does this make me look fat?" And I've said something like, "I don't know. Does it make you look fat?" Yes, I repeated the question to her. She's noticed what I'm doing there, running away from the answer. But again, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this? So it puts you in the driver's seat. You want to shift. A bunch of cult people do this, and I think we should. When we're having conversations, we should make people stop doing this. This has been my experience with Jehovah's Witnesses. They're the ones who are always asking the questions. And it's not wrong. I mean, let them ask questions. But they're the ones who came to my house. Right? I don't want them questioning me. I want to question them. They're the one who has the burden of proof in a sense. Right? They're the one who's asserting something. They're telling me, stop believing in what you're believing and become a Jehovah's Witness. But yet they sit there and they ask question after question after question. And you get overwhelmed by the amount of questions they do. And they're doing something wrong. They're doing something right in regards to like how to navigate conversations. So I'd like to answer some of the questions they throw my way and then stop there and say, "Okay, I just answered 3 of your questions. I have 3 of my own questions. Can you please answer?" So what we're doing, at least there, is sharing the driver's seat in a sense. I'm not like a passenger, right? It's question. So someone comes and says, "Man, you know, I believe that abortion should be legalized in the whole world, not just the United States. Instead of saying something like, no, that's wrong, it's immoral or something like that, and listen to what the Bible has to say on the subject. I think maybe a better way of having this conversation is saying something like, why do you think that? Why do you think that abortion should be legalized? Because their answer will determine where you go. If you try to answer beforehand, you might completely drive the car off a cliff, conversationally speaking, right? You might start answering questions that they don't even have. So as I go through, I'll continue with that conversations because there's further questions we need to ask. So 3 applications to the Colombo tactic. The first application is you gain more information. Someone says, I think abortion should be legalized not only in the United States, it's good that it's legal in the United States, but not only that, it should be legalized all throughout the world. So you say, why do you think that? They give you their spiel. You just gain more information on what it is that they believe. Number 2, the second application is to reverse the burden of proof. Now you've put them on the hot seat in the sense and saying, hey, I'm going to have some questions for you and I want you to answer. And then the third application is to indirectly exploit a weakness or a flaw. And that's what we're going to do in the next 2 cases, building on the tactic. So you ask a question, why do you think abortion should be legalized in the world? And let's say the person says something like, well, because I think women should have the right and freedom to choose whatever it is that they want over their own bodies. And there's countries in the world where this isn't true, and I think it should be the case. Right? This is a common response in regards to people who are pro-abortion. The second question you might want to ask is something to the lines of, well, how did you come to that conclusion? Right? How or why did you come to that conclusion? So I think women should have the right over their own bodies and so on and so forth. So you just sit there and say, okay, why? Why should women have a right to choose or whatever else? Now you can say something like, but the baby in the womb is not the same thing as the mother. This is a true statement. We're not talking about one person, or the fetus or the baby in the womb has a completely different DNA, and so therefore this isn't the same person. There's 2 sets of DNA in this kind of one vessel, the female body, and so therefore you can't say that. You can make some claim like that, but how much good has it done? Conversation. Or you can say, hey, why should women have this? And let them explain themselves. And some of the stuff this person might say, you might actually agree with. And say, hey, that's a good point. Yes, I think women should have a right to vote, right? Like, if that's where the conversation is going. But then you bring it back, you go, listen, the life of someone who's not born yet isn't really a one-to-one correlation to women voting. I'm cool with you on that. I don't think women should, like stay home and not vote or any one of these things. Because the person you're talking to might be asserting just ridiculous things. And you want to navigate through that. Say, oh, that's great. Yeah, but I don't believe that. I agree with you on that and all these things. So you again, come down to what the next step is, which is you start exploiting some flaws with further questions you want to ask. Okay? So that's you're exploiting flaws or misunderstandings in their thought. And before that, we mentioned these 3 things. So how did you or why did you come to that conclusion? Which graciously assumes that the person has actually reached a conclusion. Like they've thought about it and come to a conclusion rather than they believed something because someone told them to believe it. You might actually ask someone, how did you come to that conclusion? They might look at you and say, I don't know. They might give you a story. Like, oh, my college professor told me such and such a thing. Then you're able to navigate from there. So you're being gracious there that they've actually reached a conclusion. And then he has reasons for this view and has not merely asserted a certain viewpoint. 3 things off of that. It will give him a chance to express his rationale, if he has one. If he doesn't, then you can just simply ask them something like, well, isn't it kind of irrational that you believe something and you don't have reasons for it? Opens them up in the thinking. Number two, it will also give you more material to work with in addressing to the objection. Right? If the whole thing comes down to kind of this women's rights issue, then you can navigate that better instead of just making assertions. Number three, it ultimately shifts the burden of proof to the other person, which is where it often belongs. So exploiting flaws. There's 2 points on this. This tactic pushes you to think a bit more deeply. The first two tactics are in a sense passive. So you're just asking questions, right? What is it that you believe, or whatever question you start off with, and then the second one is how or why did you come to that conclusion? These are kind of passive. You're sitting there, you're asking these questions, and the person's answering. This third one requires us to do some more thinking and have information with us. That's why we went through the whole fallacies part. So you can recognize some of the things they're saying. Okay? So let's take the law of non-contradiction. Right? So something can't be both P and not P at the same time in the same way. Person, you ask them, why is it that they think abortion should be legalized all across the globe? They tell you their reasoning. You say, how did you come to that conclusion? And they tell you something like, well, I took a women's study class in college, and I realized that women are an oppressed group, or something like that. And they give you your reasons for that. And so you want to say something like, and I would say in the form of a question. Say, okay, let's just take a pregnant, set up a scenario. Say, let's take a pregnant woman. Do you think the child, the fetus in this woman, and the woman are the same person or the same thing? You don't even have to say person. So do you think the woman and whatever it is that she's carrying, I'm giving a lot of respect, right? I'm like giving stuff away. I just want to make a claim that you can give stuff like this away and still end up having a really good conversation and convincing the person that what you believe is right, because you're on the side of truth. So I don't have a problem saying, okay, I won't even say it's a person. I won't even use the term baby if that makes you uncomfortable. Let's just say thing. Do you think the woman and the thing inside her are the same? And let's just say this person says yes. This is clearly a violation of the law of non-contradiction. And all you have to do is assert some facts, like the DNA thing I mentioned. But see, you went from asserting the DNA thing, right? There's two sets of DNAs with the mother and the child in her. From doing that at your first step to doing that in like the fourth point of your conversation. And in the midst of this, you've asked questions that's opened up the person in their assertions. And now you have them, right? You're saying, okay, do you think they're the same thing? Well, yes, I do. Okay, so there's two sets of DNA. How can those two be the same thing in the same way? Where they can say it's the same DNA, but it's not. Okay, they'll say something like, okay, cool, I'll grant you that. It's two different sets of DNA. Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Now you have something on your side. Now you established the fact, but you're not the one who said it. They came to realize it on their own, and they said it to you. They've probably come to a realization that they didn't have before. You've accomplished something, right? You've taken them from point A to point B. Now listen, you might not even get this person, and I might be a bit different than others on this issue, depending on when we're having. Like if you're doing this kind of work in front of an abortion clinic, it's different than if you're doing it on the streets. If you're in front of an abortion clinic, there's people going in there, you have very limited time, like lives are on the line, literally. If you're on the street, you're talking to someone, and you're dealing with this argumentatively, you don't need to convince them, per se, right? At that moment, and that's not even our job, is what I would say. the Holy Spirit's job. I'm okay with even leaving the conversation with this person, accepting the fact that the mother and the thing inside of her have two completely DNA sets, and they're two different things. So therefore, don't treat them as one. Like, I don't have a problem walking away from a conversation like that, saying something good has been done to it. This person I just had a 10-minute conversation with has gone from believing A to believing non-A, not A. That's good. Right? Instead of spending like 45 minutes yelling back and forth with political slogans or something like that, and you don't get anywhere. I've actually had a conversation with, and if the conversation stops at that point, it stopped at a point where I can pick it up later. Let's say it happened at work. Like, you can show up to work the next day and be like, hey, you know, I was thinking about the conversation we were having yesterday. How would you feel if we continued it? It wasn't like this heated kind of thing. We didn't go crazy and yell at each other and walk away. Because life's, right, the kind of lives we live is beyond like street ministry and stuff like that. If these are people, if these are your family members you're having these conversations with, if these are the people you work with, you see these people on a daily basis. You don't want to destroy your relationship with them on a one-time conversation. You want to be able to have a conversation where you can continue that. And one thing I would say about this is just think about the amount of people who invested into you and were patient with you before you were a Christian and didn't destroy their relationship with you. And I know I had people like that, and I said really stupid things. And I'm happy they didn't destroy the relationship with me. I'm happy they kept it going. So again, you exploit flaws and you pay attention to the weak points or flaws and bring them to the surface. Most people I've done this with, and I've done this so many different times, most people do not see the flaws. It's like really simple stuff. I mean, one of the most obvious ones is saying things like, don't push your views on, it's wrong to push your views on people. And then you ask something like, is that not pushing your view on me? I've said things like that to people, and I've seen people themselves start laughing and saying, oh man, you're right. Like, they've never seen it. You know, I'm sitting there saying, really, you've never seen that, but they have it, right? And I think my job at that point is to navigate, is to help them see that. And once they've seen it, hopefully they won't do it again, right? They won't say something like, don't push your, you know, it's wrong to push your views on people. Say, listen, we all have views. And we all have views that we hold dearly and with conviction that we want other people to hold also. And you can give some examples. Like, rape is evil, and people who rape other people should be put in jail, at least. Right? Like, I want to push that view on people. I think it's a good view. I think it should be pushed on people. And most people I know would agree with you, right? Would say, yes, let's push that one. That's a good one. But how is it when we come to these other views, they don't think it should be pushed on people? Because there's some underlying reasoning, and we want to expose that. We want to bring the underlying reasoning to the surface, expose it for being fallacious, and then move on from there. This is just how to tactically navigate these conversations. I think I've said plenty. If you guys don't have questions, I'm going to end it. You guys might have questions.
For the genetic fallacy, would people bring up the issue of rape? Like, that's how the child was conceived. The genetic fallacy, but it's not a human being because it was conceived in rape.
Yes, so that's, I don't think that's necessarily the genetic fallacy.
Because it says something.
So they're formulating the belief that abortion is okay based on how. the person became pregnant.
Because this is the definition. It says where a conclusion is suggested based solely on something or someone's origin rather than its current meaning.
Well, we're talking about beliefs there. That's the thing.
Like if you say the baby's conceived in rape, then you're basically saying the origin of it, like where it came from.
It doesn't apply here.
Yeah, it's
That's
I
not.
know there's a fallacy that goes with it.
Yeah, it's not the
Might be
genetic.
false.
It's not the genetic fallacy because the genetic fallacy has to do with belief,
Yeah, beliefs upon beliefs.
right? That's something else.
Let's say you're preaching the gospel
Mm-hmm.
and you're saying, the Bible says something or God says something. How is that not an appeal to authority?
It is an appeal to authority
So how is that not a fallacy?
because it's true. No, it really depends what you're trying to say and where the person in front of you is. And I think about these conversations as like building a house or something like that. You got to do the groundwork. There's times I have conversations with people and I don't quote the Bible, but I preach. If I can put it that way, I still preach the gospel. Right. And by gospel, I don't mean like I tell people that Jesus died for them. I personally think the gospel is beyond that. Right? That it's like that end. I think the gospel is the kingdom of God. So, with that said, I think groundwork should be done there. If someone, so let's just say I quote the Bible and I say God says da da da, and they're like, well, how do we know that's God? See, that means I haven't done groundwork. I want to go back and do that groundwork. I'll leave that and say, okay, let's talk about how we know this, and I'll, present some kind of an argument or something like that for that.
So my question would be that, like, if you and I accepted the same authority, then would that mean that anything we claim that authority says would not be an appeal to authority in the sense that it's fallacious?
No, listen. There's these things. All of these fallacies. There's a reason why these things are called informal fallacies. Number one. Okay, there's a difference between formal fallacies and informal fallacies. The reason why these things are informal fallacies is because they're not necessarily, they're more fluid. They're not set in stone per se. Right? Let's say you go to the doctor and the doctor says you have cancer and you're dying, you have 2 months to live. Right? And let's say you're telling your friends, you're like, man, I'm so sad. I went to the doctor, they told me that I have 2 months to live. And one of your friends pops out and says, can't take that, bro, appeal to authority. Right? Just because the doctor said it doesn't mean it's right. Like you think your friend is stupid for saying something like that. Right? So there's authority that should be trusted is what I'm saying. If they're basing the whole argument on this appeal to authority, then that's something else. Again, they're more like navigational light posts or something like that rather than set in stone kind of stuff. There's definitely authority that should be trusted. But if that's the only thing you have, authority says that therefore it must be true. Kind of thing. And we have more reasons to believe why the Bible is the Word of God and why we believe in Jesus and all this stuff. We have more reasons, we have more evidences, whatever, however you want to formulate that. We have more of it. So when you read the Bible and you say, God says, whatever, and that person's like, well, you can't say that because you haven't shown it. Okay, cool, let's do the work. Let's talk about that. Because you're not just saying God says, and in the circular sense, right? God says it. Why? Because it's in the Bible. Well, how can we trust the Bible? Because the Bible says it's God and stuff like that. You're not doing that number. Because you're speaking already from someone who built up a case. You're already saying that. You're speaking out of your own presuppositions. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody does it. If the guy's like, no, that's not God, they're speaking from their own presuppositions. Right? How does he know? How does he know that? Has he investigated the subject? I mean, you can shift the burden of proof and ask him that. Have you actually investigated the resurrection of Jesus Christ if you're making a statement like Jesus Christ didn't resurrect from the dead? Most people haven't. But they have a lack of belief in the resurrection. They don't believe the resurrection. Why? So we're all speaking from a certain kind of presupposition. And if someone calls you out on that and you go, yeah, I'm going to speak like that because that's actually what I believe. I'm not going to change the way I speak. Now you can say, yeah, it's not the Bible. I'm cool. We can have a conversation about that. You know. Now it doesn't mean what you're saying is any less authoritative, and it doesn't mean like you're saying the Bible is not the Word of God. Because you're still stable in your own beliefs about your own quotations about where you stand on the Word of God. Your own stance hasn't changed. But again, I'm all about, when it comes to, again, we're talking about communication, conduct, and tactics. And this is way beyond just giving like answers to people. I don't want that. People can go on the internet, Google something, and get a bunch of answers. Right? They can do it on their phone and probably get a better, more concise answer than the one that you and I might get on the internet without all the emotional attachments. But I'm about how to have clear, open communication where we're going somewhere with it. And listen, I'll give you an example from my own personal life. I'm having an argument with my wife, right? Let's say we're in the middle of an argument, and then in the middle of it, we realize that the reason why we're having the argument we're having is because there's an unsettled argument we had yesterday. What do? Do I ignore yesterday's unsettled argument and continue with the argument we're having today? I think that's wrong. I think what we need to do is go back, have yesterday's unsettled argument again, settle it, then we can move on to today's argument. And I think when it comes to preaching the gospel, and again, really depends what you mean by that. If that means I'm going to tell you that Jesus Christ died for your sins and resurrected from the dead 3 days later, and if you put your faith and trust in him, you will be saved. If that's what we mean by the gospel, you can just say that without quoting the passage. Right? You can just assert that. And that's great, and it should be done at certain places and points. But if you're having a dialogue about the truth values of that, if it should be trusted, where do you get your sources? I get it from the Bible. How can we trust the Bible? Then you're having further conversations about this. That's what I'm more concerned about. It's having that conversation rather than these assumptions. So, yeah, good stuff. I guess like an end note is what I would say is, it seems to me that in evangelicalism, I say that because I'm an evangelical, we've developed a habit of telling people. We talk about preaching a lot, and we've developed a habit of preaching at people. Right? And we're very poor at speaking with people, in my opinion. And even if people are believing wrong things, listening to their wrong beliefs. Or like viewing this kind of notion we have in the back of our minds, like what they believe is complete junk, and we shouldn't pay attention to it because God doesn't agree with it. I think we should hear them out. It's a good thing to hear them out. I think it's a part of loving people. It's a part of being free, and God lets us have false beliefs. Is all like we have false beliefs about God. Tons of people do. It doesn't strike us down dead or something like that. It gives us room to develop those and change those into the place where we have right beliefs about God. I hope that makes sense. I think that's the way we should act. We should just reflect God. I love it when in Isaiah God tells Israel, "Come, let us reason together." Come, let us reason together. Like God doesn't need to reason with them. He's right, they're wrong. But yet he says, "Come, let us reason together." And the reason why he's saying it is because he wants them to come to salvation. He wants them to come to repentance. So God humbles himself to reason with human beings because he loves them and cares for them. And I think we ought to humble ourselves and reason with people because we love them and care for them. Okay. Thanks for joining us, people.
Thank you, Arthur.
That was